Hey, 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 good evening. It is happy hour with Dr. Lisa. Good evening. I am your host, Dr. Lisa, and I'm so happy to be on the air. Sorry I'm a little bit late. I am here now. I apologize. Forgive me. I am on spring break this week. So if you are tuning in live, that means that I have not combed my hair. No makeup, and I am wearing my glasses, honeys. And I feel just as confident as ever. There was a time when I was, gosh, younger, between high school and maybe 25, when you never would have caught me without makeup and earrings and my hair done like to a T. Now I'm like, it's me. Who cares? My shirt says mom mode. So I'm in mom mode this week, spring break. So I hope you guys are having a great week. Hey, my prayers are going out to those of you who've had significant weather patterns this week. Some of you have experienced tornadoes and just severe weather, and that's pretty scary. So my prayers are going out to you if you are listening and you are going through that, because when I lived in St. Louis, I don't know if you guys know this or not, but there are many severe weather patterns in that area of the Midwest. And we were in the basement around this time, April through maybe, oh, early May, mid-May, as far as I can recall. And we would be in the basement because we constantly had tornado warnings. So you guys pray for them, because it's not easy and it's scary. So last week I was telling you guys about, a conversation that I was having with um, my kids and my family at dinner from some cards that we use in the evening called Just Between Us. And if you want to get a visual of them, you can look on my blog 39. I wrote this blog back in November. And because at that time we had played this game, as I mentioned last week, and I figured out what card it was, because I actually wrote it down in the blog. And so I'll tell you about that in a second, but I want to give a shout out to my friend who actually sent these cards to me. Her name is Lene, and she actually has a podcast herself. It's called At Imagine Yourself Podcast. So when you have a second, check her out at Imagine Yourself Podcast. But we've been friends since like kindergarten. So what's that, 45 years? We lost touch and came back, and it's like we never skipped a beat. We just caught up since we were little girls. And so I might have to actually post a picture of us on my website for my next vlog, because it is relative to what I'm going to write about. So, anyway, I mentioned last week when we were playing that game, I couldn't remember what card it was and what the card said. And it said, "What are your greatest fears?" And that's when my daughter mentioned about her dad or my husband getting older and that she's afraid of it. So I had to actually talk to her and to my son about death. And I noticed a pattern over the years of questions that I would get in reference to death from parents and from, kids, and even kids who um, do not see ghosts. I get a lot of questions about death, especially when something traumatic happens and a relative or parent is very sick, um, and so kids want to know this stuff. What's different about nebulous kids is that they can actually see ghosts. And so death is a bit different to some of them, not all. And so a lot of parents will ask me questions, even recently. Should I talk to my kid about death? I had someone die, someone was shot, someone was, sick, someone was murdered. Should I talk to my kid about it? Because it's very real and my kids are asking. And for nebulous kids, it's, I know it's my grandpa, or I know it's my grandma, or, my uncle who I loved is showing himself to me. What do I do about it? And so, as I mentioned last week, you go ahead and tell them the truth. The last thing you want to do is either to lie to kids about death or lie to them about, what happened to a relative. You may want to safeguard some details, depending on the nature of those details and how horrific they are. But kids are resilient. They're probably even more resilient than adults. Look at my hair. They're probably even more resilient than adults. So you can actually talk to kids. Like, for example, I talk to my kids, I always have all three of them about different life events. So we talk about emotions. We've talked about, death. And just a sidebar, most recently, I realized I got to have the big talk with one of my kids. I just realized yesterday, I was like, God, I haven't done that. I think I need to do that. And I asked, I said, did I talk to you about where babies come from? And she's like, no. I said, crap, I'm late. I got to talk to her about it. So big things, big life events. I want you to be perfectly honest with your children. Now, remember, I talk about stories based upon my experiences with children in psychology. So, what I experienced or have experienced and still do may not apply to all psychologists. So, think about this in terms of what I've experienced. And the one thing that I have experienced with nebulous children is that a lot of them feared death. Makes sense, right? Because they can look into a room and see ghosts. And kids are smart enough to know that the things that they're seeing are not human. And so they typically will ask about them, what is that? It's a ghost. Is it a good ghost? Is it a bad ghost? Older children would say, is it a demon or is it an angel? Or it is an angel, or that is a demon, or it's a demon posing as an angel, and God, this angel is angelic or, heavenly. So kids understand the differences between nebulous kids. I'm talking about understand the differences between light versus dark because they can actually see it. So, for example, with God's angels, nebulous kids used to tell me they can tell the difference because God's angels glow white. And when you pray for protection from God's angels, they actually appear, and anything that's demonic or dark will actually disappear from their vision. So it became really interesting for me because then the questions would be, well, where did it go? Did it go to heaven? Where is heaven? What happens after you die? I mean, I had a whole host of questions, and these kids would actually tell me, if different ghosts were being deceptive or if they, had wings, and if they would go to God and tell God about the prayers. I mean, it was really deep. So imagine being a therapist or a psychologist, or if you're testing kids. I just had this happen to me, and one of them just starts saying, hey, there's an angel behind you, and it stays close to you, and it has wings, and it's really bright and glowing, and she's smiling, and she looks like this, and she is everywhere you walk in a room, she's right behind you. I mean, you'd be scratching your head like I am now, thinking, okay, what is happening here? And so these kids are, aware of these things. And they have this common question: why are they ghosts? Well, what happens when you die? Why are they ghosts? I try to stay away from questions with kids like, why are they ghosts? And the reason that I try to stay away from it is because it just all depends on your belief system. And I don't push my belief system off on kids and parents or anyone else. I will talk to you all about my experiences and what worked when I was working with these kids. But there are certain questions that I try not to answer. Why are there ghosts? That was a question that the kids would ask me because they just didn't know why they would appear or why they would appear to them. However, there are times when I actually had to answer it, right? And I actually just had to answer a question similar to this last week. And so I try to be as honest as I can. I am not a specialist, I'm not a nurse or a doctor who deals with death or end of life, but I've talked to plenty of nurses who work in, for example, residential treatment centers and for the elderly. I can't remember right now the name of I can see it in my brain, but I'm having a brain fart or a malfunction on the name of those treatment centers. But anyway, they are residential properties for the elderly. And there have been several nurses who told me that when individuals pass away under their care, before they pass away, they start seeing different things. So they start seeing relatives and they start talking to them, or they start saying things like, look at the angel over there. She's come to get me because it's time for me to go. Or I had a nurse tell me every single patient that she worked with who was going to pass away had this same behavior pattern, that they would always start talking to relatives like, there was my mother came to get me. And so when kids can see this stuff too, they ask, why do they appear, or why do they appear to them even when individuals are not dying? And so because I'm guarded with religion, right? Because I don't want to put my religion off on these kids. I tell them to tell me, what they think happened. And so some people believe that when you pass away, there is no purgatory period, for example. So all of these spirits that kids see are demons. Kids tell me that's not true. They are not all demons. If you pray and you know the difference, right? But someone who believes that there's no purgatory period, for example, will just default to these are all demons. Whereas some people do believe in the afterlife and that there is a purgatory period, right? And some people actually believe that there are ghosts that are unsettled, right? And so they don't pass on, they just stay. So you see, there are different ways to answer that question, and that's why that question can be really difficult to answer for kids. So that's what I would tell them. It's a difficult question to answer, and it's difficult because I know that you are curious about death, but I really want you to rely on your parents to answer, why are there ghosts? So for myself, I might have a different belief about why they're ghosts, right? And so I don't necessarily want to push the kids away, but I always go back to them and re-question them to tell me what their experience is like, as opposed to me saying, no, there's no purgatory period. It's just heaven or hell. It just depends on what you believe. And so to help them process that question, I like it when kids draw pictures. I like it when they draw me pictures. And I really, let me just sidebar for a second. I used to really like when the kids would draw me pictures. And I have one kid that I'm going to ask to draw me a picture of it now. In a couple of weeks, I'm going to ask this kid to do this. But I used to really like when they would draw me a picture of what they looked like when they were asleep and how they felt sleep paralysis, which is a blog that I wrote about 2 weeks ago. And so sometimes I would have the kids just draw me a picture so that we can process what was going on in their minds when they questioned death, or when they questioned what ghosts look like, or why do ghosts exist. And so we could kind of talk about it a lot easier together when they put details in the picture. So, for example, if everything was dark and scary, because some of this is dark and scary to kids, or if they drew an angel. I remember a kid drew me this beautiful picture of an angel. I wish I still had it. Very beautiful. And it glowed the way that the kid, drew the picture. Then there was one who drew a picture of little bitty angels, a couple of little bitty angels up in the sky that this kid could see. So a lot of different pictures. And so the way that the kids would tap into it would be to tell me what they visualize in these pictures from the ghosts that they can see about death, if that makes sense. So, for example, the little kid who drew the angels, like the little bitty ones up in the sky, well, the little kid can look up and see angels, in the room. And so those angels, that was how it was depicted in the picture, that if you look up, the angels were in the room, kind of hovering over this kid, which gave this kid a sense of security. And so that's how I would kind of talk about death. Well, where are the angels going? They're up in the sky or they're up in the room. Oh, I think they're going back to God. Okay. So do they remind you of the other types of ghosts that you see that look more human? Well, no, these don't look like humans. These are not human. They are angels. So that's how I would kind of go around it. And so that led into I got quiet for a second because sometimes it would lead into other questions like do spirits come out of the body when the person dies? So kids would actually picture someone deceased laying down, for example, and then a spirit would rise out of that person. So sometimes I did have to be pretty blunt, because especially teenagers, they want a yes or no answer. Sometimes with teenagers, if you say no, they'll say, yes, it is. That's how it happened. Because they would either see that ghost, some of them would talk to them and ask, is this what happened? And I guess some of them, the ghost would say yes. And so kids would explain it to me that way as well. So you see why I had to tread lightly on that question, which came quite a bit. The other thing is that teenagers will understand, of course, how vulnerable they can be when it came to seeing ghosts versus the little ones. The little ones had a tendency to play with the ghosts. The older ones kind of understood the difference between light and dark ghosts much better than the little kids, right? Because sometimes when I would talk to the little kids, they would kind of say, these are my friends. I actually just met a kid like that. These are my friends. The older kids would go, I don't want anything to do with the dark ones unless they would just really want to talk to, all of them. Sometimes with little kids, ghosts would appear as little children like them to be more trustworthy. So that's why little kids were a lot more vulnerable to, you know, being more on the receiving end, if you will, of talking to these ghosts. But I would always talk to the kids and their parents about making sure these kids are very careful about what they're doing. And teenagers kind of, by the time they would come to me, they would kind of understand when they needed to deal with the ghosts and when they didn't. And sometimes they've had this ability for so long that they've developed coping mechanisms to, make these ghosts go away. But they would always come back and they couldn't figure out why they would come back. And obviously it was because they didn't know how to rid themselves of them properly, especially the dark ones, and their mental health was, in jeopardy by the time they would come to see me. So it's a lot, certainly an emotional impact, on these kids. Um, let's see. Oh, I know. I would really, I had to, I was thinking about a certain situation. After someone would pass away, if the kid was seeing me, would come back to me and would tell me things like, I saw the ghost of that person on the casket, or I saw the ghost of that person standing next to their body looking at us um, at the funeral. Or I saw this person riding on the limo. I'm sorry, not the person, the ghost. I'm talking about the ghost. Or I saw the ghost of this person, looking at the flowers. Or I saw this ghost was upset because a lot of people didn't celebrate. Or I saw the ghost of this person who felt as if they didn't want everybody to be sad and cry over them, right? So these are some of the stories that I heard from nebulous children. They could actually see. And so understand, especially with the teenagers or the older kids, the tweens and the teens, if they are at a funeral and they can see a body in a casket, obviously they're smart enough to know that this person has passed away, right? The older kids. But then they look to the left or the right, and then they see this what they believe is the spirit of that person standing next to the casket. Well, what would you do as an adult, or what would you do as an older child listening to this podcast, or a parent of a nebulous child, and your kid told you this? It would completely blow you away. And that's the kind of stuff that I would hear from these kids. And that would prompt the questions about ghosts. Do you understand? In that situation, they would see the deceased body, then see the alleged spirit of that person. They would come back and say, but was that really that person? And when people die, is that what really happens? And when I die, is my spirit going to come back? Because I have some people I want to haunt. We all do, right? And so this is a time when, we can be honest with the kids. I guess you could be guarded too. It was harder for me because I had to do therapy with a lot of these kids, and I can't be known as the lying therapist, right? No, they don't come back. Kids, just rely on your parents to help you out with that part. And there was an emotional impact on a lot of these kids with death because it's confusing. They can see these entities. Sometimes they felt lonely because they couldn't tell anybody that Jimmy was standing next to the casket as they were carrying it away, or there were several ghosts walking with Jimmy's pole bearers, or whatever they're called. And so they don't know who to tell. And so sometimes they would be really lonely when they would tell me, like, I really wanted to tell my mom. My grandpa was sitting right there, but she just hushed me up because we were at a funeral, so I didn't tell anybody. Um, and sometimes the kids just didn't want to have the ability to see ghosts any longer. And you can understand that, right? Because I did. I understood that they just didn't want to be bothered with these things anymore, especially after something like death, because it was just too hard on them emotionally. So I would get a group of kids who would say things to me like, how come I can see them? Nobody else could see it at the funeral but me. Why won't they go away? Why do they follow me to school? This one's been following me for a long time. How do I get rid of them? You know, why can't other kids see them? Now, remember, I've met a lot of kids who can see ghosts, but I can't tell anyone about, I couldn't disclose that information to each of them when they were coming. I almost wanted to have a group. One of these days, I might do that, do some group therapy specifically for kids like this, because there were a lot of them, and I am actually starting to see more now and they have some of the same symptoms as kids that I saw, 15, 20 years ago who are now adults. And so if I had a thought about it back then, maybe I could have had a group going because these kids really had a lot of questions and really needed other kids who can do this, but I couldn't disclose it, back then. And sometimes I would see the kids right after each other. I mean, it became really interesting and stressful sometimes for me. So, you know, one of the common questions, another one that I would get is, will I be a ghost when I die? Yeah, will I be a ghost when I die? And so the questions will always go back to death. It will always go back to death. And so that's why I always say, to adults and parents, yeah, go ahead and talk about, death with your kids. Um, and in these situations, with nebulous children, I would always encourage the parents to talk about death. Go ahead and talk about it. They're seeing ghosts. Whether you believe that they see ghosts or not, or imaginary friends, they're asking you about death. A lot of parents are afraid to talk to their kids about death. And they're also afraid to talk about ghosts. So what do you do when you have to talk about both? You just talk about them. Even if you have to elicit someone else to help you, you just go ahead and talk about it. I always feel like you want your kids to learn from you and not on the street, right? My mother used to tell me that I want you to learn some things from me. And of course, you'll learn things as you get older. But I'd rather be the one to tell you, for example, about sex than somebody else on the street, which is something that I do to my own kids. And so in conversation, go ahead and talk about, death to your kids if they have questions. No different than if they had questions about sex. That's a hard conversation with your kids, but you got to have it, right? Same thing with death. Um, with nebulous children, you want to ask them too, what do they see and how it appears to them? So, death doesn't mean that we all come back as ghosts, right? And that also depends on what you believe in, but you can talk to your kids about those things and help them to understand, what's happening. It's a question that we may not have the answer to, and that's okay to say as well. My son asked me a question last week, and I said, you know what? I just don't have the answer to that one. Maybe you can help me figure it out over time. I just don't know everything, and I don't know the answer to your question. So if you don't know why your kids see ghosts, just tell them, I don't know why you do, but I want to hear what you have to say about it. It's a question that is really hard. But here's what happens psychologically when you do give your kids the opportunity to talk to you. It improves their mental health. You know, I met a young woman recently who said, I have to talk to you. I have to talk to you. I have to talk to you. And I said, okay. I said, give me, until we get back from spring break to talk to me. She said, okay. I got to talk to you about something that I saw. And I said, a ghost? She said, yeah. I said, okay. And then she started to smile. I said, but just hold tight till we get back. And then you can tell me everything about it. I want to know. And so what did that do to her? She's like, okay, yes, because I can finally talk to you about it. I can talk to somebody about it. Well, my goal, because this was someone who was very scared of what's seen, my goal was to decrease that fear, give this kid more control over what's being seen, and improve the mental health of this kid, right? And how do you improve their mental health? Because everybody needs somebody to talk to. Everybody needs somebody to talk to. And so this is a kid who, when this kid comes to me, is scared sometimes and can release that fear and have the catharsis needed in order to go to school and to continue to make good grades without harboring some feelings of sadness, feelings of fear, feelings of rejection. Somebody wants to listen. So, what are my personal views about? I never really talk about my personal views, but I'll give you my personal view about this. As far as death goes, personally, yes, I do talk to my kids about, I will when the time comes. I have not had to talk to my kids too much about death, except the situation with the cards we were playing. I will talk to my kids from my religious belief. You know, my kids know that I work with kids like this, but I don't allow them to listen to my podcast. They're still already scared of a monster, so they definitely aren't going to start getting paranoid thinking that there are ghosts in the room. I do think they sneak and listen to me because they tell me they found my podcast, so I'm nervous about that. But um, I feel the best way to fight for a child's sanity is to allow them to openly talk to you. I see parents who just dismiss their kids and their experiences, and I don't want you to do that because I want you to give your kids the opportunity um, to come to you and to talk about death when they need to, as opposed to, oh, I just knocked my microphone over. Sorry about that. As opposed to talking to somebody like me. If they do come and talk to me about death, I am definitely going to include parents in it. My belief is that parents are an important part of the process. And so when we get to talking about death and personal beliefs, my philosophy is you always have to include parents, and that means the schools. I hold parents accountable when kids come under my care. So I think because children are closest to God, this is what I believe, that sometimes the veil is lifted from their eyes, and this is why they can see ghosts, but society might have different beliefs about that. And so some people or some kids keep that gift and will always have it. How do I know? From my experience, I've met a ton of nebulous parents. That's how I come to the conclusion that I do, who have told me that they've always seen ghosts since they were kids. So they're not surprised that their kids can see ghosts. There are some kids like this where ghosts randomly appear to them, including in times of death. So it could be the death of a loved one, or some kids have sat in front of me and said they see someone that was a relative of mine who deceased, who died. So I've had that experience too. And so can all of this be empirically proven? Somebody asked me a scientific question because psychology is a science. And I'm going to say, I do not know if it can be scientifically proven. I can say, however, that my experience with these kids goes way back over the course of about 20 years. So, over that time period, I probably could have done some research, but all I can do is what I call case studies, or what we call case studies in psychology, over and over and over again about the experiences of nebulous children and their parents. So that to me is my own research. Just writing case studies over and over again about these different children's abilities to see ghosts. Um, so the connection between, you know, nebulous children's experiences with seeing ghosts, death, and whether those two are connected or can be proven or not. Well, I don't think I'm going to try to figure that out. I'm just going to believe that the kids are telling me the truth because I can connect what they say to my past experiences dealing with other nebulous children. So that's how I made my connection. So I don't need to do any specific research to prove whether or not this ability is scientific. Now, if you go to Google, for example, and you research on your own kids who can see ghosts, you'll find a ton of research about it. So there are people out there who actively research, and I'm not talking about, ghost hunters or TV shows. I'm talking about, people who actually write about their experiences, or other psychologists, paranormal psychologists who talk about these things. I am no parapsychologist. My doctorate is in clinical psychology, child psychology at that. But these are just random kids that I met throughout the years, and they still are lovely, random children that I've met who have this ability, and their stories are the same over and over and over again about their abilities to see ghosts. So, what do you take from this blog today, which is actually going to be a shorter blog? A shorter podcast. I'm looking at my blog and talking to you all on the podcast. From blog 39, what I want you to take home is that it is a safe thing to do to talk about death when it's appropriate. Just as safe as any other topic, major topic, that you will have to talk to your children about. And when you do begin to open up that door, I want you to remember that these kids hold quite a bit of information, secret information. Secret is not bad. They just don't know how to always tell you about their experiences and the questions that they have about death. Same thing with sex. Sometimes kids just don't know how to start the topic, but you don't want them to learn on their own. You go ahead and talk to them. Next week is blog 40. Speaking of silent children, that one is all about silent children. And this is a difficult topic for me, because I really don't like it when kids keep their thoughts to themselves, when they need to be socially adjusted and well-balanced human beings. And so when children are withdrawn, that is a critical sign that something is truly going on. And we're going to talk about that next week. And I noticed that this would happen a lot with some of the children that I worked with who can see ghosts. And actually, it is happening to a child that I'm going to introduce to you in blog 40. So before you come on the podcast next week, go ahead to the website, LisaLigginsChambers.com, and read blog 40 and start thinking about some of the kids that you've encountered. Child age is a really important kid to discuss with regard to children being silenced. The last thing I'm going to say before we sign off is that before I came on the podcast, I saw, and right now I can't remember the city, so forgive me because I just don't remember, but I saw a horrific car accident that just occurred. A lot of tragedies happened, a plane crash. So let me talk about the car accident. 6 girls died in that car accident. And I was mortified when I saw it because it came up on the news here, all the way in central Illinois where I live. And I made the mistake of seeing a car, and I can close my eyes right now and visualize that car. Please pray for their families. I cannot imagine what they're going through. And also over in China, the plane crash. I always try to make sure that I say something publicly when it's appropriate about these things because there's so much going on. And so I want to, say a prayer for their families as well over in China. And lastly, we have something really special going on in our country right now, in America. I don't know how to not talk about this topic. My blog is not really for, political issues at all. And I don't necessarily like talking about politics because I go on and on and on and on and on, and I really get into politics secretly. And I try not to, but guys, some of the experiences that Miss Brown Jackson has that you can see live on CNN, I'm sorry, on any news channel, CNN. With her confirmation, some of the same things have happened to me. Some of the microaggressions don't always have to be physical. They can be verbal. I experience that stuff quite often. Let me tell you something. It is not easy. It is hard, and it's especially hard when you try to be diplomatic and respectful to other people, yet they minimize your accomplishments and they poke fun at them, if you will, which is some of the stuff that's happening to her. So be cognizant of how you treat people. You know, it is something that Black women in particular fight quite a bit. A lady said to me, "Oh my God, you write so well." And I've heard that a couple of times, right? And I'm like, well, how the heck did you think I was supposed to write? I mean, I have the highest freaking degree in the building. How did you think I was supposed to write? You know, or oh, you're so articulate. When I heard that was said to her, I thought, people just don't understand how that feels. You know, that's been said to me a couple of times too. And I'm like, what do you mean I'm articulate? I play around and can go into my culture and ethnicity verbally, but I can be just as professional as the next person. But what do you mean I'm articulate? How did you think I got this far in life not being articulate? Those things are said to Black women quite often. Just be conscious of that kind of stuff. You know, it's degrading. And it is a microaggression. And that's all I want to say about that. You guys, I want you to have a wonderful week. And thank you so much for listening. And I'll see you next week.